Go wash off the illusion of mattering." The words cracked across the yacht deck like a whip. They didn't drift. They didn't soften. They landed like a shove, and then her palm followed. In a blur of silk and fury, a woman in a scarlet gown lunged forward, both hands slamming against the chest of the black woman in violet. Gasps tore through the crowd as glasses rattled on silver trays, champagne spilling like splintered light onto the teak floor. The sunset should have been the star here, Mediterranean gold bleeding across the horizon, but it wasn't. The moment that line was spoken, the air shifted. The ocean wasn't calm anymore. It was complicit, waiting for a body to break its surface. She stumbled back, her fingers clenching the polished railing. The yacht tilted slightly with the weight of silence. Dozens of eyes locked on her, some horrified, some eager, some indifferent. In that pause, she could almost hear the judgment in their stares, louder than the waves below. But she didn't scream. She didn't beg. Her breath caught, then steadied. The woman in red sneered, hair falling from its perfect waves, eyes wild with a jealous kind of righteousness. "This party isn't for you. This life isn't for you." Her voice was venom dressed as etiquette. The crowd trembled between laughter and shock. A young server froze mid-step, the silver tray in his hand shaking until crystal clinked like bells at a funeral. A man in a navy suit leaned toward his companion, whispering, "She should have known better." And still she stood, purple silk pressed against the rail, eyes wide, lips parted but unspeaking. Not broken, not yet. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. Her name, though none of them spoke, it was power. But here, tonight, she'd chosen silence. She'd chosen to arrive without bodyguards, without headlines, without her title stitched into every introduction. Just a woman in a gown, hair pinned neat, skin gleaming under the chandelier glow. And that choice, the simplicity of it, had invited the insult. The shove wasn't the first, not in her life. It was the echo of years of being told you don't belong. Hotels where clerks pretended not to see her. Banks where managers demanded proof of her worth. Flights where attendants questioned her seat. But here, on a vessel she had personally financed, that same sentence returned with teeth. Wash off the illusion of mattering. The ocean stretched wide, darkening with the last rays of day. It threatened to swallow her whole. The crowd leaned forward, breathless, waiting for her to fall. Yet she gripped the railing harder. Her spine straightened. Her silence grew heavier than any scream could have. The shove was meant to erase her. But instead it wrote the beginning of a reckoning. The moment before the shove had looked ordinary. Music from a string quartet floated across the deck. Laughter mingled with the clink of crystal. The chandelier overhead glittered against polished wood, and the Mediterranean stretched infinite and calm. On the surface, it was just another luxury gathering. And then there was her. She hadn't arrived with fanfare. No camera crew, no entourage, no designer clutch to announce her worth. Just a violet gown, simple, elegant, not dripping with logos and a presence that made people pause without knowing why. She walked the deck with quiet assurance, nodding to the waiters, thanking the bartender as he poured still water instead of champagne. She was not there to be seen. She was there to observe. To them, she was a guest. To herself, she was a test. The yacht anchored off Monaco was not a rental. It was hers. Every inch of teak, every chandelier, every flute of champagne had been funded by her company's balance sheet. But tonight, she chose not to claim it. Tonight, she wanted to see the truth in people's eyes when they believed she was no one. It wasn't the first time she'd done this. At 25, she had walked into her own hotel lobby wearing sneakers, only to be mistaken for staff and told to fetch towels. At 32, she visited a branch of her bank dressed in jeans, only to be accused of fraud when withdrawing her own money. And now, years later, she had returned to the same experiment, step into her empire as a stranger. The results never changed. By the rail, she leaned into the sea breeze, letting it lift a strand of hair from her cheek. She smiled faintly, not from joy but recognition. She had seen the glances already, men in tuxedos eyeing her with curiosity, women in glittering gowns whispering behind manicured hands. Not hatred, not violence. Just the quiet dismissal of someone who didn't fit the picture they expected. That was the illusion. That was the setup. Her husband had arranged the guest list, or so everyone thought. He moved through the crowd in his navy suit, drink in hand, laughter rehearsed. The man beside him, his lover, in red wore envy like perfume, thick and suffocating. The irony was sharp. The party was supposed to celebrate an expansion, a merger finalized that very week. The headlines in tomorrow's paper would read of wealth, vision, and legacy. But none of that mattered here. What mattered was how they treated a woman in violet when they believed she was nothing more than a +1. She could have ended it before it started. She could have announced herself, let the truth clear the air like thunder. But instead, she waited. She wanted the mask to slip. She wanted the contempt to reveal itself, unprovoked, because contempt always does. So she stood alone at the edge of her own yacht, skin catching the last fire of sunset, gaze fixed on the horizon, calm, silent, watching. And in that silence, envy found its voice. The scarlet gown, the sharp shove, the words meant to erase her. Only they hadn't. You think silk can hide the truth? Her voice dripped like venom as she stepped closer, red gown swaying in the evening breeze. Every heel strike against the teak sounded like a gavel, a verdict already passed. She didn't whisper. She wanted everyone to hear. This isn't your world. Not these walls. Not this deck. Not this man. Her hand slid possessively along the arm of the husband, who stood rigid, eyes darting between his lover's fury and his wife's silence. Guests leaned in, eager for spectacle. Champagne flutes hovered mid-air. A young banker chuckled into his sleeve, muttering, "Well, she does look out of place." His date nodded, her diamond earrings flashing like agreement. The woman in violet still didn't speak. Her fingers brushed the railing, steadying herself not against the sea, but against the storm tightening around her. Red pressed on. "Tell me, did you borrow that dress? Did you sneak onto this yacht thinking no one would notice?" She circled like a predator, voice rising. "This is a celebration for power, for people who belong. And you're a shadow in borrowed light." Laughter cracked from somewhere in the crowd. Not everyone, but enough to wound. A man in a crisp tuxedo raised his glass and chimed in, "She should be grateful she was even invited." The scarlet woman seized the cue. "Exactly. Gratitude would have suited you. Silence would have kept you safe." She leaned in, whispering loud enough for half the deck. "But you thought you mattered." Her husband shifted uncomfortably. His jaw tightened, but no words came. He let the accusation hang, cowardice disguised as restraint. A waiter stumbled, nearly dropping his tray. The air had grown too heavy, too sharp. A woman in emerald whispered to her companion, "This is cruel." But her companion hissed back, "Stay quiet. Don't get involved." The violet figure breathed in slowly, shoulders squared, eyes steady. Still no protest, still no scream. Her silence now wasn't weakness, it was weight. Every unsaid word pressed harder on the crowd than if she had shouted. But the scarlet woman mistook it for surrender. She smiled, triumphant. "See? Nothing to say. Because deep down, you know I'm right. You don't belong here." The sea hissed against the yacht's hull, a quiet witness to the cruelty. Overhead, the last streaks of sun melted into night, painting the sky bruised purple, the same color as her gown. And in that twilight, the tension didn't fade. It sharpened. She did not flinch, not when the words pierced, not when laughter rippled across the deck like broken glass. Her hand stayed on the railing, fingers curled with quiet precision. One deep inhale steadied her shoulders, a rhythm learned long ago in boardrooms where silence spoke louder than anger. She lifted her chin, just slightly, enough to meet the scarlet woman's glare with eyes that did not waver. The red gown shifted closer, perfume heavy, voice sharp. "What? No defense? No excuses?" Still nothing. The husband's lips parted, then closed again. His silence was different cowardice, not control. He hid behind his glass, behind his status, behind the woman in red who did the speaking for him. The crowd buzzed. A guest whispered, "Why isn't she saying anything?" Another replied, "Because she can't. Look at her, she's trapped." But the truth was different. She wasn't trapped. She was choosing. Choosing restraint. Choosing dignity. Choosing to let their words reveal more about them than about her. The waiter who had nearly dropped his tray earlier glanced again, trembling. His young face mirrored confusion. Why wasn't she fighting back? Why did she look calmer than anyone else? Her silence spread like a current. The laughter faltered. The venom thinned. The Scarlet Woman pressed harder, desperate now. "Say something. Admit you don't belong." The violet figure finally moved just one breath, one step forward. Her voice, when it came, was softer than the wind, yet sharper than steel. "I don't argue with storms. I wait for them to pass." The crowd stilled. Eyes widened. Even the husband lowered his glass, uneasy. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't defiance dressed in rage. It was composure, weaponized. Her silence had been the strike. Her calm, the cut. The Scarlet Woman laughed, brittle. "Pretty words. Empty words. You think quiet makes you strong?" But the guests weren't so sure anymore. A ripple of doubt crossed the deck. Someone muttered, "Strong is exactly what that looks like." The woman in violet turned back to the horizon, dismissing the red gown with nothing more than her posture. She did not retreat. She did not cower. She simply remained. And in that stillness, she shifted the weight of the room. The Scarlet Woman clenched her jaw, realizing too late, silence had become the loudest voice on the yacht. The hush on the deck didn't last. It cracked, splintered, shifted into whispers. A young guest near the bar, barely 30, phone already in hand, tapped record. The red circle blinked, capturing everything. The shove, the sneer, the silence that followed. His voice, low but urgent, slipped into the microphone. "You're watching this live. Horizon Yacht, Monaco. They're humiliating her." Ugh. Across the deck, a woman in emerald raised her glass halfway, then stopped. Her hand trembled. "This isn't right," she muttered to her husband. He frowned, eyes darting. "Don't get involved. It's not our fight." But involvement had already begun. A server, no older than 20, stood frozen with his tray. Champagne spilled down his sleeve, but he didn't notice. His eyes locked on the violet figure. Something about her stillness unsettled him. It didn't feel like defeat. It felt like waiting. Two guests whispered too loudly near the rail. "She doesn't belong here," one said. The other replied, "Maybe, but why does it feel like she's the only one holding dignity?" The red-gowned woman sensed the shift and pressed harder, voice sharp enough to slice through the murmurs. "Don't be fooled by her act. This," she gestured wildly toward the silent figure, "this is trespassing dressed as class." But the camera phones were multiplying. One blinked from the upper deck, another from a corner table. People weren't just watching, they were archiving, preserving. The violet woman turned slightly, eyes grazing the young server. For a moment, he thought she might speak to him. She didn't, but the look was enough. His chest tightened. His hand lowered the tray. He whispered almost to himself, "They're wrong." The first words spoken in her defense. A man in a white dinner jacket, older, voice steady, cleared his throat. "This is unbecoming," he said to no one and everyone. A celebration turned into cruelty. His words hung heavier than the music still trying to play. The Scarlet Woman shot him a glare. "Stay out of it." But it was too late. The witnesses weren't shadows anymore. They were present, visible, undeniable. Phones recorded. Eyes judged. Murmurs spread like cracks in glass. And at the center, she remained silent, anchored, deliberate, letting the storm of witnesses gather around her. Because she knew, once witnesses speak, silence is no longer isolation. It becomes a weapon. The silence had begun to tip the room, and the woman in red felt it. She bared her teeth in a smile too sharp to be gracious. "You're all confused," she said, raising her voice so even the upper deck could hear. "This isn't poise. It's deception. Women like her always think they can sneak in dressed up in someone else's glow." Her words cut through the air, and this time, she wasn't alone. A man in a navy tuxedo, one of her husband's business partners, stepped forward. His cufflinks gleamed, his drink tilted lazily. "She's right," he said, eyes narrowing at the violet figure. "I've seen this before. Imposters, pretenders. They slip into circles they don't belong in, cost everyone else their comfort." The crowd shifted. Some nodded. Others folded their arms, weighing silence against complicity. The woman in violet did not move. Her stillness only seemed to provoke more. Another guest, younger, emboldened by the moment, smirked as he raised his glass. "I'll say it plain. Money doesn't come dressed like that. Not here. Not tonight." A ripple of laughter followed, nervous but present. The kind of laughter that hides behind power, hoping it won't be noticed later. The husband stayed rooted, jaw tight, eyes darting anywhere but at her. His silence was consent, and the woman in red used it like armor. She wrapped herself around his arm, voice rising higher. See? They know. They all know. You don't belong here. The witnesses from earlier, the young server, the man in white, the woman in emerald, shifted uncomfortably. They had spoken once, but now the tide was louder, crueler. Their voices felt smaller. Phones kept recording, their red dots blinking like tiny warnings in the dark. The Scarlet Woman seized her moment. She stepped closer, leaned in, her voice sharp as glass. Tell them! Tell us all! Who are you, really? A guest? A fraud? A parasite in silk? Her laughter rang false, but it echoed. Others joined in, not from conviction, but from fear of standing apart. And still the Violet Woman said nothing. Her silence wasn't emptiness. It was weight, pressing down on the deck, forcing every insult to bounce back louder than before. The man in the navy tuxedo sneered, shaking his head. Unbelievable, that she thinks she has a place here. He turned to the crowd, inviting agreement. If this were my yacht, I'd have her thrown overboard already. A hush fell at those words, violent, unmasked. Even the music faltered, but the Scarlet Woman smiled, as if cruelty were champagne, intoxicating and sweet. The storm had gathered. The insults sharpened. The crowd leaned closer, waiting for her to break. She did not. Not yet. The storm broke in one violent gesture. Scarlet silk flared as the woman in red lunged forward. Her hand snapped at the Violet Woman's throat, not to choke, but to tear. Fingers hooked the chain resting against her collarbone, a slender piece of gold that caught the last light of the horizon. With one sharp yank, it snapped. Gasps cracked through the deck. The sound of breaking metal was louder than the quartet's strings, louder than the sea itself. The chain dangled from her fist. She held it aloft like a trophy, then sneered. This? This is what you think makes you belong? Trinkets, cheap illusion. And before anyone could stop her, she hurled it over the railing. The necklace arced through the air, caught one glimmer of sunset, then vanished into the black water below. A woman near the bar clutched her pearls. A man muttered, "That's too far." But no one moved. No one stopped her. The husband's face paled. His hand twitched as if to intervene, then fell uselessly back to his side. The red-gowned woman laughed, triumphant. See? Even the ocean knows you don't belong here. It swallows you. It swallows your kind. Her words hit harder than the shove, harder than the laughter that followed. It wasn't just insult anymore. It was erasure. The violet figure didn't flinch. Her hand touched the bare spot at her collarbone once, softly, like acknowledging a wound. Then she straightened. The young server dropped his tray. Glass shattered against the deck. He whispered, voice trembling but audible, "That's theft." "Oh." The Scarlet Woman spun on him. "Stay out of this. You serve drinks. You don't serve opinions." But the phones were watching. The witnesses were multiplying. The man in white said it louder this time. "Enough." His voice cut through the crowd, steadier now. "This isn't cruelty anymore. This is criminal." The Scarlet Woman smirked, dismissive. "And what will you do?" "Nothing. Just like her. Silence. Always silence." She turned back to the woman in violet, circling, pressing closer. "What now? No necklace. No voice. Nothing left to prove you belong. Admit it. Say it in front of them all. You're nothing here." The deck fell quiet. Even the sea seemed to pause, waves lapping softly against the hull. The violet woman's breath was calm, her silence stretched, thick and unyielding. And then she spoke. Not loud, not frantic, just steady, cutting. "You mistake destruction for proof, but the only thing you've proven is your fear." The words landed heavier than the broken chain at the bottom of the sea. The crowd froze. The Scarlet Woman's smirk faltered, if only for a second. But the damage was done. The insult had reached its peak. The line had been crossed. And the reckoning was about to begin. Her hand lowered from the bare spot at her collarbone. The chain was gone, swallowed by the sea, but her composure remained intact, polished like steel under pressure. She reached for her clutch, not frantic, not trembling, deliberate. The crowd leaned in, expecting collapse, maybe even tears. Instead, they watched her pull out a slim black phone, its screen glowing in the twilight. One tap, no hesitation. A voice answered instantly, crisp, controlled. "Ma'am?" Her lips parted just enough for the words to glide through the air. "Activate protocol. Full record. Begin now. The phone's speaker carried the reply, firm as law. Confirmed. Recording initiated. All feeds synced. Murmurs spread across the deck. A guest frowned. Feeds? What feeds? Another whispered. What's she talking about? The Scarlet Woman scoffed. Too loud, too quick. Pathetic, calling for help like some cornered stray. No protocol can save you. But her laugh trembled, because the young server was already looking around, noticing the yacht's discreet cameras, black domes in the corners, tiny red lights blinking alive. The ship itself had started watching. The Violet Woman's voice didn't rise, but it cut through every gasp, every whisper, every insult, every shove, every theft, logged, archived, irrevocable. The man in the navy tuxedo barked out a laugh. Bluff, empty words. But his eyes darted toward the ceiling, catching the faint red glow. The husband finally stirred, stepping forward. His voice cracked. Enough games. End this now before... Before what? She interrupted, calm as the tide. Before the truth becomes undeniable? He faltered, silence dragging him back into the crowd. The Scarlet Woman sneered, trying to reclaim the room. What truth? That you don't belong here? That you're nothing but a dressed-up fraud? But her words didn't echo the same way anymore. They collided with the steady hum of technology now awake on the yacht, a chorus of mechanical witnesses siding with the silent woman in violet. The man in white adjusted his cufflinks, eyes sharpening. She's not bluffing, he muttered. This ship has eyes. And phones kept filming. The witnesses had multiplied. The storm was no longer one-sided. The Violet Woman pressed the phone closer, voice steady. Continue. Upload everything to the board. Notify compliance. Make sure the timestamps are visible. The reply came back immediate. Done. LiveSync is active. The Scarlet Woman's face drained of color. Board. Compliance. What board? The violet figure didn't answer. She didn't need to. Not yet. Instead, she closed the phone softly, like sealing a verdict. And in that silence, the balance shifted. She had not shouted. She had not struck back. But with one call, she had set the reckoning in motion. The Scarlet Woman's laughter faltered. The crowd's whispers grew heavier, layered with unease. Every eye drifted toward the violet figure, waiting, wondering. She didn't keep them waiting. Her phone still in hand, she tapped once more. The screen glowed, a single command flashing across it. Owner verification. Active. From somewhere deep within the yacht, a tone chimed. Low, resonant, undeniable. The kind of sound that carried authority without words. The young server gasped. That's a system override. Heads turned. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Even the husband's posture collapsed, shoulders slumping under the weight of recognition. He knew that tone. He'd heard it before, but never like this. Never turned against him. The Violet Woman stepped forward. Not rushing, not desperate, just deliberate, every movement claiming the space as her own. Her voice cut through the night. This yacht is mine. The words didn't shout. They didn't need to. They rolled across the deck like a wave, submerging every sneer, every whispered doubt. The Scarlet Woman shook her head, wild-eyed. Lies. Anyone can say that. Anyone can... But she stopped. Because just then, the yacht responded. Lights along the railing shifted, glowing a deep royal blue. A subtle change except for those who knew. Owner's mode. The man in the white dinner jacket exhaled sharply, almost reverent. She's telling the truth. Phones tilted upward, recording every flicker of light, every stunned expression. The Violet Woman didn't look at them. She didn't look at the scarlet gown or the coward husband beside her. She looked out across the deck, across the crowd, and spoke again. You mocked me on my own vessel. You called me nothing. You called me a fraud. But every contract signed, every name on this guest list, every glass in your hands belongs to me. Her words landed like hammer strikes. No one dared to laugh now. The Scarlet Woman's lips parted, desperate to form a denial. But no sound came. She glanced at the husband, pleading. He stared at the floor, mute, exposed. The violet figure took another step forward, her gown catching the last glimmers of chandelier light. Her presence expanded, not by volume but by certainty. This celebration you claimed as yours, she continued, eyes narrowing, was mine before it began. And tonight, every witness here will leave, knowing exactly who holds this deck. Silence. Heavy. Irrevocable. The young server lowered his tray to the floor, standing straighter now. The woman in emerald lifted her chin, meeting the CEO's gaze with something like respect. Phones kept rolling, but now they captured more than humiliation. They captured revelation. The Scarlet Woman's face drained of color. She had reached for a necklace to erase her. Instead, she had unveiled a crown no one could tear away. And the balance of power shifted completely. For a moment, the deck was nothing but silence. Then the cracks began to show. The woman in red staggered back, her heels scraping against the teak. "No," she whispered, voice unraveling. "No, you can't. This is impossible." Her hand reached for the husband's arm, clawing for support. But he didn't meet her grip. He couldn't. His face had drained to gray, the weight of his cowardice dragging him down. He had known deep down what her silence meant. Now the world knew too. Guests shifted like a tide. Some gasped aloud. A few clapped hands to their mouths in disbelief. Phones lifted higher, streaming the revelation in real time. Comments were already buzzing across screens. "She owns it. She owns all of it." The young server's voice broke the spell. "I knew it," he breathed. Louder now. "She's the owner." He said it with awe, with vindication, as though naming it made the injustice real. The woman in emerald nodded sharply. "And they tried to erase her." She raised her glass, not in mockery now, but in recognition. The man in white squared his shoulders, speaking with the kind of authority only age could lend. "Enough games," he said, eyes cutting toward the husband and the scarlet figure. "You've humiliated the very person who gave you this night." The Scarlet Woman shook her head wildly, her mask slipping. "She's bluffing. She's nothing." But her voice cracked, thin and brittle. Because the yacht itself had betrayed her. Owner's mode lights still glowed along the railing. Cameras still blinked. Systems still hummed with authority that wasn't hers. Her laughter returned, but it was hollow now, desperate. "This doesn't change anything. Look at her. Look at her dress. She doesn't belong here." But no one laughed with her. The crowd had turned. Where there had been smirks, now there was shame. Where there had been complicity, now there was anger. Not at the Violet Woman, but at those who had tried to erase her. A guest muttered into his phone, "I'm never doing business with him again." Another whispered, "They'll regret this." Everyone saw. The husband finally spoke, voice low, broken. "Please, don't do this here." Her eyes cut toward him, steady and sharp. "Here is exactly where this ends." Phones zoomed closer. The witnesses weren't hiding anymore. They were part of the stage, part of the reckoning. Every angle, every gasp, every collapse of arrogance was being captured. The Scarlet Woman's shoulders sagged. Her defiance wilted. Around her, support evaporated like mist in sunlight. And at the center, the woman in violet stood unshaken. What had been dismissed as silence now looked like control. What had been mocked as passivity now gleamed as power. The deck no longer belonged to the cruel or the complicit. It belonged to her. The moment for mercy had passed. Her silence had exposed them. Her revelation had broken them. Now came the verdict. She raised the phone once more, her thumb gliding across the screen. "Confirmed termination," she said evenly, her voice carrying across the deck. "Effective immediately." A crisp reply came through the speaker. "Confirmed. Access revoked." And with that, the yacht itself responded. The husband's wristband, a sleek metal band that doubled as a guest credential, flashed red. The Scarlet Woman's too. Their privileges dissolved in an instant. The crowd saw it, gasped at it, whispered at it. It was no bluff. It was enforcement. Security appeared not from chaos, but from order. Two staff members in tailored black suits stepped forward from the shadows of the deck, posture straight, movements calm. They didn't need weapons. They had authority, and it was written in every stride. "Escort them off my vessel," the Violet Woman instructed. "No anger, no hesitation, just fact." The Scarlet Woman shrieked, voice brittle. "You can't do this! This is my night! He chose me!" But her words collapsed against the wall of reality. This was not her night. It had never been. The husband sputtered, reaching out. "Please, listen, we can discuss this in private." She turned her gaze on him, cool and unflinching. "You let her speak for you. You let her steal for you, and you let her shame me in a place I own." She took one deliberate step closer. "Your silence was your choice. Now this is mine." He froze, eyes wide. the weight of his downfall pressing into his chest. The guards reached them. One touched the husband's shoulder, the other gestured toward the scarlet woman. They resisted for a moment, flailing, shouting, but the crowd didn't shield them. Phones captured every second. Guests parted, not in solidarity but in rejection, clearing a path to the exit. "Wait!" the scarlet woman screamed. "She can't! She won't!" Her words broke into sobs. Her heels clattered against the deck as she was ushered away, her voice shrinking with every step. The husband didn't scream. He sagged, defeated, his voice a whisper as he was led off the yacht. Don't do this." But it was already done. The deck was still. The humiliation that had begun with laughter ended with silence, except now the silence didn't belong to her. It belonged to them. The violet figure lowered her phone. She hadn't shouted once. She hadn't begged. She had simply commanded, and the world obeyed. And as the last trace of Scarlet disappeared down the gangway, the witnesses knew this wasn't just retribution. It was justice. Swift, public, irrevocable. The deck exhaled. For the first time all evening, the air was clear, not poisoned by mockery, not tense with doubt, just still. She stood at the center, violet gown brushing against the teak, the ocean behind her now less a threat and more a throne. Every eye was on her, every phone recorded. But her gaze was fixed not on the crowd, not on the lights, not on the husband disappearing into the night. It was on the horizon, calm and endless. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, low, yet carried to every corner of the yacht. "You tried to erase me with your words. You tried to strip me with your hands. You tried to sink me in the very ocean I own." Her eyes lifted, sweeping across the witnesses, across the guilty, across the silent. "But I don't vanish when pushed. I rise." The words hung heavy, sinking deeper than any insult hurled before. She paused, then continued, sharper now, her voice cutting through the night like a blade. "Power doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it doesn't need permission, it's simply island. And tonight, you've all seen it for yourselves." A murmur rippled through the guests. Some nodded, some whispered. A few raised their glasses, not for the husband, not for the scarlet woman, but for her. She turned back toward the sea, where the necklace still lay somewhere in the depths. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You can throw gold into the ocean. You can rip fabric. You can shout until your throat breaks. None of it changes the truth." Her voice dropped to a whisper, the kind that forces everyone to lean closer, listen harder. "I am not the clip you tried to capture. I am the result." Phones caught it. The crowd felt it. The moment solidified into legend before their very eyes. Then she straightened, shoulders squared, posture unshakable. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, and it's still island, not for those who mocked, not for those who stayed silent, but for the witnesses who will leave knowing that dignity cannot be drowned. Applause began slowly hesitant, scattered. Then it grew, stronger, louder, until it filled the deck, rising above the sea's rhythm, above the memory of cruelty. The young server, still clutching an empty tray, joined in. The woman in emerald clapped with tears in her eyes. Even the man in white, stoic until now, lifted his glass high in tribute. The scarlet was gone. The coward was gone. What remained was power, unshaken, undeniable. The violet figure turned once more, voice carrying her final words into the night. "You don't erase me by pushing me overboard. I own the ocean beneath." And with that, the reckoning was complete.